Citadel Gray Line back on the air. Hello and welcome into this program where each week we gather and we talk about the Citadel Bulldogs and all that goes on at South Carolina's Military College. John Rawl is my name. Great to be on with you. If you would like to participate on Citadel Gray Line this week, we've got a couple of easy ways for you to do that. You can send us an email, citadel@yall.com, citadel@y'all.com. And we also have our 843-779-8496 number. You can text and join in on the fun. 843-779-8496. That's how you can get in touch with our program, a program powered in part by some great partners, IPS Packaging and Automation, Franklin Plumbing and Drain Services, located in the Midlands of South Carolina. Also in the 803, you've got Daybreak Adult Care Services and Pedigo Electric Bikes with locations in both Aiken and in West Columbia, a.k.a. Soda City. Also, y'all.com helps power our program this week. Here on Citadel Gray Line, we're going to get you ready for the Citadel's final home game. Wofford rolls into Johnson-Haygood Stadium, and one of these teams, they're going to find a victory, a much-needed SoCon victory when it's all said and done. We got that to talk about. The basketball team with their first game in the books. They played NC State earlier in the week. We'll discuss that. But we also have a very special guest joining Andrew Miller of the Charleston Post and Courier and I, a co-host this week, and that would be former Citadel player, former Citadel head football coach, Ellis Johnson. He was on our very first season of the Gray Line back in 2008. The 15-year probation period has ended, Ellis, and you're back on Citadel Gray Line. Welcome in, sir.
It was probably well deserved, John. I don't know how good a job I did, but a little off time might help me.
Well, you went a lot of places in those 15 years. You've been a lot of places in your entire career, and I think you've kind of got a nice, comfortable spot in the Midlands of South Carolina these days. We're going to learn a lot about that. We're going to learn about remind people a little bit about your own Citadel experience, but also a guy that was an assistant with you, a guy that you took to Hattiesburg to be a Southern Miss assistant. Maurice Drayton is the Citadel's head football coach, and I know you two have a long history together.
Yes, when I took the job as head coach in 2001, Maurice was a holdover from the previous staff, and he did a fantastic job. I obviously had great respect for him, and took him to Southern Miss. Felt terrible about that. That thing was a disaster, and everybody was gone in one year. I call him Mo. Y'all have to accept that on the broadcast. He's Mo to me. But he and three other guys, I mean, they relocated and traveled quite a ways from where they were, and they had good jobs at the time, and I just really felt bad about it. But he's landed on his feet. Of course, his last tenure was with the NFL. I think he had 6 or 7 years, and just with some of my contacts up there, was developing and has a tremendous respect and around that league. And so that's why when he was released at certain places, he immediately got jobs. He's well respected in the NFL. I think he'll get things going at the Citadel. He faced it a little bit of what I did. I did not want to run the wishbone, and I came in behind the triple option coaches from two previous staffs, and it took a while to change it. We played a freshman quarterback, a true freshman quarterback the first year. He didn't stay at the Citadel after that season. And then we had to bring in two grad transfers the next two seasons. And it was just difficult to find someone who could throw the ball well enough. And I think he's kind of getting in the same situation. But he'll do a great job. We've got to have some patience, and it'll get better.
All right, we're going to talk to you much, much more as we go forward on today's Citadel Gray Line. Again, our very special guest is a former Citadel Bulldog player and then head coach in the early 2000s, Ellis Johnson. Now, this guy here has covered Ellis Johnson in the day, not necessarily in Charleston. Andrew, welcome back into the show. Tell me a little bit about your connection to Coach Johnson.
Well, Coach Johnson was the defensive coordinator in South Carolina when I kind of had to fill in on that beat a couple of different seasons when our beat writers left for other jobs, Travis Haney being one of them. That I think that was '09, I believe. That was the year that South Carolina went to the SEC championship game and played that great Auburn team. And then a couple of years later, I did it again. And I think Ellis was still there again. Those are when the head ball coach, Steve Spurrier, who's one of my favorite head coaches to cover, no matter what sport that I've ever dealt with. Always had a great one-liner. But Ellis did a great job. And you think about some of those defenses that the Gamecocks had, the Jadeveon Clowney and all that crew back then, and he had some tremendous talent, and he did a great job. And he's a big reason why those teams went 11-2. Because if you look back at those teams were really based around complementary football, great defensive teams, good in the kicking game, and Spurrier, who's supposed to be the offensive genius, I think he did just enough for those teams to get those teams in the winning record. But 11-2, 3 straight seasons in a row, 9-4. I think was the year before that. So that 4-year stretch, which they honored up at Williams-Brice Stadium this past weekend, those are so far, unfortunately, so far as a graduate of the University of South Carolina, that's as good as it's ever gotten, and Ellis was a huge part of that.
Pretty strong words, Coach.
Well, we had some great players, and I think it was a period of time some really good players were in the state of South Carolina, and there are always some good ones, but not the numbers that we had. And we did a great job of keeping them at home and beating Clemson on several of them. And that's the name of the game, guys. Is players. You can outcoach people sometime, but not very often. You just have a good plan that lets players, make plays. And if you put them in the right place and you got the right players, you'll be successful.
I believe one of those heralded players that you get maybe a little credit for recruiting out of the Rock Hill area, Mr. Jadeveon Clowney.
Yes, he was #1 rated player in high school and came out #1 pick in the draft. And that's very unusual. The big key to that, my very first recruiting class that I worked on, Stephon Gilmore came out of the same high school. And when Jadeveon came along, he was a little bit bigger deal in the recruiting services and some of the media coverage and everything. But Stephon was in his own right, every bit as good a player, and he was really well respected in that school system up there, the Rock Hill school systems, and growing up in Little League. And gosh, we got Stephon. I got Devontae Holloman, probably due to Stephon. They were very close. And then, of course, 2 years later, Clowney comes out with one of the Dixon boys. We got him and his brother, who was over at Northwestern. It was just an unbelievable group that came out of there. And Stephon started it all off. Of course, Jadeveon, as you said, was the big catch from the PR side of it.
Another player
I
from
think
that
about Melvin
area.
Ingram too.
Yeah.
Melvin Ingram was a great player for you guys back in the day then as well. I know
Yeah.
he's in North Carolina, but just a huge part of those teams.
Another
Y'all, we had
player,
some great players.
another player from Rock Hill we got to give some love to, the late Mitchell Jeter. Do you remember him at all?
I remember Mitchell. I don't think he played when we were there, but I do remember him.
Big part of Citadel football back in the 2015 SoCon championship season, and unfortunately died just after his playing career wrapped up at the Citadel. But a big part of a big victory against those Gamecocks in 2015 there in Mike Houston's final season. We're talking with Ellis Johnson, our special guest. This is Citadel Gray Line. Again, if you'd like to weigh in, we welcome you to do that with a text, 843-779-8496. We're going to be here breaking down the last couple of games with Coach Johnson and more. And I want to first ask you, Coach, this is a season that, unfortunately for you, the last time you were a head coach, you did not win a single game all year when you were at Southern Miss. And unfortunately, your buddy, Mo, our buddy, Citadel head coach Maurice Drayton, has right now an 0-9 season. So what is it like to go through such a difficult ordeal?
It's tough, and even when you not predicted to be that good, and that they were picked down to the bottom of the conference to start with. You got a transition year. It's a tough situation. You could Citadel could maybe line up and play a Clemson tomorrow, and obviously they'd be a big underdog. But the problem a lot of people don't understand is you still have to handle that team after the game. And, kids are players. They're competitors. They think they got a shot anytime they go out there. They work 4 or 5 days to get ready, just like the other team. So their input, their efforts, their practicing, and all those kind of things go in. And losing is losing. It doesn't matter anyway. I don't care who you're losing to. It's losing, and it's hard to keep kids focused, and it's hard to keep them motivated to come back out and attack it again next week. So that's the biggest challenge. He's been in enough. He's experienced enough. His staff has experienced enough. They know what they've got to do to build the program back up. It's going to take recruiting. It's going to take some things of where they get better at what systems they're changing and all of that. But in between there, you got to kind of hang out that shingle and be a psychiatrist after every game and pick them up and get them going for the next week. And like I said before, I've got total confidence he'll get it right.
Andrew?
Yeah, and I think he talked about it a couple weeks ago. Mo talked about it a couple weeks ago, and I asked him the question. I said, "Do you feel like you've lost anybody on the team?" And he felt like he had not. And I think any thought that he had lost people on this team, any players is what I'm talking about. I think they were answered in the first half against Mercer this past Saturday, where I thought they played one of the best halves of football they've played all season long. They controlled the ball. They played great defense, played great complementary football, and that's what it's going to take to win at the Citadel. And it just seemed like everybody was fired up. Everybody was really into the game. And at that point, they had lost 8 games in a row and really hadn't been in many games at all except the BMI game. And I think I was right. I don't think he's lost anybody on this team. I think everybody is still all in, as they say. It's just going to take some, as Coach Johnson said, some recruiting, get some players in, and kind of get this thing moving forward. But I've got confidence in Maurice to get it done as well.
Well, the Citadel, again, with the last 2 games left, this past game, a loss at home to Mercer on homecoming. Beautiful, full crowd there on hand for what was Maurice Drayton's 25th class reunion, class of 1998, getting together. And Coach Drayton mentioned that he had a chance to hang out with a couple of his classmates on the Friday evening prior to the Saturday's game. Coach Johnson, have you had a chance to see the Citadel in person or on television this year?
I have seen them in person 2 games and hope to come this coming weekend. My son is a walk-on at Clemson. He's a freshman, and so anytime he gets to dress out, I usually go up there. But I saw them play VMI, had every chance to win that game, and they got themselves in position to win the game. So I'm not, it's certainly not a detraction, but they had opportunities to win that game, and that's what happens when you haven't been winning. Sometimes you don't make those 2 or 3 plays at the end of a close game to win it. And then the previous one was Western Carolina. And at that time of the season, they were completely outclassed by Western Carolina talent-wise. And you can tell I've got the coach there is a pretty good friend. And I recruited his high school back before we got in college coaching. And he does a fantastic job. He's been able to get his system and his players in there. They're just a really good football team. I think they've lost a couple of games they shouldn't have lost this year. So, yeah, I've seen them 2 times. One time they, really weren't competitive. One time they should have won that ball game, and it's just, hadn't learned how to win yet. They will.
Well, I know up until a couple of years ago, you were kind of an analyst, if you will, I believe, for South Carolina was your last gig. I don't think you're doing that now. You are appearing on a lot of talk shows like Sports Talk in South Carolina. You're a regular guest there. Got to thank Thomas Scruggs for reminding me that you were part of that. Thomas, our co-host here on the show, I saw him appear like he was about to come on, and then he disappeared. Unfortunately, he's got to work another job, so he must have got called away for that. Therefore, we don't have him currently on the show. But Thomas loves to listen to you with Phil Kornblut when you appear on that several times. And, of course, you also are involved with an Auburn Tiger podcast that you're involved with there. And look, I lost track at all the different stops that you've made. Do you know off of your head how many different colleges you've coached at during your tenure?
I can name them. I don't know if I can tell you the number off the top of my head, but I can name them if that'll be something anybody's interested in listening to.
Well, I know Steve Spurrier, your old boss, used to keep in his office all the old football helmets of the teams he was involved in as either a player or a coach. Do you have such a display somewhere?
I did. I moved recently and kind of temporarily staying upstate, and then my kids before I moved back to the coast. So I've got a lot of stuff packed in boxes, and I don't know if I'm gonna unpack those helmets. They take up
Okay.
too much space.
Well, you might have
He
to
didn't
have.
have as many as I do.
No, that's what
He's,
I was going to say.
he's
Spurrier.
he's done a little better in his stops than I have, but he doesn't have as many helmets. He's
Well,
got more game balls, I'll bet that.
maybe so. Well, now you were quite a defensive end back in the 1970s. We were talking about recruiting. Who gets the credit for getting you to the Citadel?
That's a great story. And they called it defensive end back then. We played the old wide tackle six, and what I actually played was sort of like a strong safety, outside backer. But my recruiting story, I had two older brothers that both went to West Point and played football at Army. And I listened to them come home on holidays, and I kind of had decided by the time I got my junior year in high school, I was not going to a military school. So anyhow, I really wanted to go to Carolina or Clemson, like I guess any in-state football player. Got recruited by both of them, but never got the scholarship offer. And my high school coach was a Citadel grad. He played on the 61, or I think it's 61, Tangerine Bowl team. And he would always kind of slip the Citadel in our ears as far as choices of where we might want to go. And he kept talking to me. The signing date back then used to be in December. And he kept telling me during the well, and I said, Coach, I'm going to walk on at Clemson. And he said, well, Citadel still got a scholarship if you want to go. And he kept on, he kept on. So I just felt like it was something I had to do for my father. You know, instead of making him pay for it, I'd go to the Citadel. So I took the scholarship offer. Coach Dwight Adams came by my house. I signed the scholarship. I think it was in the middle of May. I had never seen the Citadel in my life. So that he told me to come down first week of June when I got out of high school. And so we were down at the beach, a bunch of guys, and I jumped in the little Volkswagen Beetle and drove up to Charleston and spent the night in the barracks with my good buddy George Coleman, who was a year ahead of me there, hometown buddy. And spent the night in the barracks one night, and we went out and met some of the players and all that good stuff. The next morning, he had breakfast set up with Coach Bobby Roper. He was a secondary coach back then. We went to a little breakfast spot just across the Ashland River. He got a newspaper and was sitting across the table reading the newspaper the whole time. I'm absolutely convinced that he didn't even know who I was. But that was my recruiting story for the Citadel. But I went to the Citadel and had never seen it in my life, and it's probably the best decision I ever made.
But Coach, didn't you actually start out at West Point?
No, I went to the Citadel, and one of those two older brothers I was telling you about, part of his active duty service, he was sent to West Point to be the freshman football coach.
Okay.
And he got the assignment right after I signed with the Citadel. And so he kept working on me, calling me, and asking if I wanted to come to West Point. So I left after one semester, John, and went home. Just went to work with my uncle surveying because you can't transfer credits to West Point. And I entered West Point the following summer and stayed for the full year, and decided that Citadel was a whole lot better. Charleston is a lot better than Highland Falls. The Atlantic Ocean is a lot better than the Hudson River. And standing in formation in January in Charleston is no fun, but in West Point, it's miserable. But that I went back to the Citadel and finished. And I wish I'd never left because I had to technically, they let me play freshman football again at West Point, but I had to redshirt when I came back. And I lost really a season of varsity football. I was a junior before was eligible to play in the varsity football game.
And we thought that this whole transfer portal and NLI was confusing.
Oh no, man! The NIL it wasn't a factor in this. The only NIL for me was getting a summer job. But yeah, I wore the portal out before it was ever invented.
All right, we're talking with Ellis Johnson, a Citadel player, class of '75, and I guess you'd have been there in the Bobby Ross era.
Yes, I was recruited by Coach Coach Parker and his staff, and then I came back from West Point. They were still there, and my redshirt year was Coach Parker's last year.
Okay.
And then he left, and Coach Ross came in. And my last 2 years, I actually played for Coach Ross and stayed on the year as an assistant coach, as a student coach for him.
And what a staff that was with you and you had also a guy named Beamer on that staff, and what's the old Maryland, Ralph Friedgen was there, and more.
Absolutely. I think there were five succeeding head coaches on that staff. You know, of course, you mentioned Coach Beamer, Coach Friedgen. Coach Ross went on to play in the Super Bowl and win ACC championships at Maryland and national championship at Georgia Tech. Uh, you know, Cal McCombs later had very successful coordinator for Air Force and head coach at BMI. When I was at the Citadel, we played coached against each other. And then Jimmy Laycock, what a fantastic career he had up at William and Mary. Of course, we won 3 games their first year, and I think we won 4 or 5 the second year. And a bunch of my buddies that played under Coach Parker, they thought these guys couldn't coach. And about 15 years later, had to all look each other in the eye and said, you know, I don't think we were very good. I think they could coach. We just couldn't run very fast.
Wow. Well, again, you had played at the Citadel, graduated, and went on to be in high school ranks. You were in college ranks at places like Appalachian State, Gardner Webb, and then, lo and behold, you go to schools like Alabama back in the time period. I guess that would have been. Were you part of the national championship team of '92?
Yeah, we came in 1990 with Coach Stallings. That was
Okay.
his first year, and I stayed 4 years. And of course, '92 we won the '91. We also uh, had a good season, but that's when we had 34 in a row unbeaten and 31 wins in a row over those 2 seasons, well, 3 seasons. And but '92, of course, was the national championship. And I left to be a coordinator and went to Clemson and was there 3 years with Tommy West. When Coach Stallings retired and Mike Dubose took over, we had coached together on the defensive side, so I went back to Alabama as defensive coordinator and stayed 4 more years. And they weren't nearly as good a years as we had, but we did win the SEC in 1999. Had a real good football team. Actually beat Coach Spurrier in the championship game. But
Yes,
we got beat in Miami by some guy named Tom Brady,
I
whoever that
remember
guy
that.
is.
I remember y'all. I went to a game, the very first Music City Bowl. Alabama lost to
I,
Virginia Tech.
I hope
Back
you
in
dressed warm.
I did. That was a rough night there. But ultimately, you left Bama. You left T-Town. You left Dreamland to come to Bessenger country because you got a job as head coach at your alma mater, and you started coaching the Citadel in 2001. What was it like to, after all those years, to finally get that head coaching gig, and in this case, at your alma mater?
I was really excited. Uh, I had a couple other opportunities that I had to, decide, and some of them, quite frankly, paid a little bit more. I didn't like where they were located. Other than that, professionally, I made a decision that was just something I really wanted to do before I got out of coaching. And it's a hard job, guys. I mean, I'm not going to paint it any other way, and it's getting harder. And the Citadel is in much better shape right now than it was when I was there, and certainly going back more years. Better salaries, better facilities, probably better players. But the neighborhood has changed culturally in the NCAA, and I'm not talking about the Southern Conference. I'm talking about the whole deal. And I think we're going to have to come to some reality at some point in time. But yeah, it's a tough job. I had a really good staff. I brought in Les Herring, who had been a part of the national championship team at Clemson. He ran the defense. Jeff Thieler and Mark Fleetwood ran the offense. Really good coaches, especially for the level we were on. And we finally got it going that last year. And I think we would have had a shot to get into playoffs. We got Nehemiah Broughton. He was their running back that eventually played for the Redskins. And Nemo hurt his knee against Chattanooga in the first quarter, I think. And we didn't have him for 3 games. And we lost to Chattanooga and lost to East Tennessee State at the end of the season. Walford was better than we were that year. They beat us at home, and they were better than we were. And early in the season, we lost to Western Carolina. We weren't a good football team at the time. Maryland stoned us, and Delaware whipped us. Delaware ended up being the national champion. And I think our kids didn't know how good we were. We had a good team, and they had to learn how to win. And of course, we beat Furman, Appalachian, Georgia Southern, back to back to back. And then they realized we could win. And they realized we had a good football team. had a shot to do it, but the injury, I think that injury really killed us. He was a fantastic back in that league. He was a man, and later, played some pro ball for the Redskins.
That's right. But the Citadel ends up 6-6 that year, and you, on your own accord, right, took off to go to Stark Vegas.
I had to make a decision. We had our third child on the way, and it was going to be about over 100% pay raise. And I just decided I had tremendous respect for Sylvester Croom. I'd met him several times. We were at Alabama, that's of course where he played.
Yeah.
And that was just the lure of the SEC, and of course some financial things, some personal things about my career. And I felt like it was something that I had to do. And I felt like the program was in better shape than when I took it over. I didn't like leaving in that number of years. I felt like I should have stayed a little longer, but it was a decision I felt like I just had to do from a personal standpoint, professionally and family. But it was hard exit. And I remember one time, John, I was riding down the street. I'd gone over, as you always do. Coaches get there and they working for about 3 months, and finally the family moves. I was riding down the street in Starkville, and this truck was passing on my left and had mud splattered all up the side of it. And I'm on the phone with my wife. Of course, she's sitting in Kings James Island on a tidal creek about 3 miles from Folly Beach. And I kept telling her how much she was going to love Starkville. and as soon as I'd tell her, I'd pray, Lord, please don't let her leave when she comes over here. But it did turn out to be one of the nicest places we lived as a family. It was the first place we lived with all 3 children having been born. And it was a wonderful thing. We had just turned out our minister at the church was a Conway native, Gamecock. And he'd gone to the Citadel with his brother. His older brother, Robbie, was a baseball player at Citadel. So we loved the church, the community, and then we finally got it going there too. Beat Alabama back to back, and finally got in a bowl game. Had some good things happening, and then that's when I came to Carolina.
Yeah, again, Sylvester Croom, the first black head coach in the SEC, and I saw that MSU team play that year that y'all. In fact, I was at the game that y'all won the Egg Bowl in a dramatic way when Orgeron decided to go for it on 4th down. Y'all stopped him, and lo and behold, MSU goes on to I think the Liberty Bowl that year. So,
yep,
a great time there for the Bullies of MSU. We're talking with Ellis Johnson.
Another factoid, we played Central Florida in that bowl, and Charlie Taft was the offensive coordinator.
How about that?
At Central Florida. He was with George.
Oh, yes. Again, we're talking with Ellis Johnson here on Citadel Gray Line today. Welcome your feedback as we have all things Citadel queued up for you. I want to remind you that we're presented in part by IPS Packaging, and we'd like to let you know that IPS Packaging is a true champion both with their work and off the field. A family-owned and operated powerhouse that's been a titan in the packaging industry since 1976. With over 4 decades in the game, IPS Packaging and Automation stands tall as a leader in packaging products, automation, and their top-notch service. The Fountain Inn-based IPS Packaging and Automation plays a crucial role in the packaging processes of countless businesses and manufacturing facilities over the entire U.S. And a fun fact, Bulldog fans, IPS Packaging and Automation has been a proud sponsor of Citadel Athletics the last decade. Discover what they can do for you. Dive into their website, ipack.com, or call 800-277-7007. IPS Packaging and Automation, a proud supporter of Citadel Athletics. I'm going to tell you about Daybreak Adult Care in just a few. But, Andrew, I've been hogging up all the questions here with Ellis Johnson, and it's time for you to get to work, sir. Wake up. And I'm just kidding on that factor. Questions you might have with the coach, sir.
Well, I'm curious as when you switch from a 4-man front defensively to a 3-man front, which is what Raleigh Jackson has done. He's kind of running a 4-2-5. I'm sorry, a 3-2-5. Is that? Yeah, that's 11. Yeah, and you ran a similar defense, I think, in South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, we called it a 4-2-5. And
okay. But when you switch
Yeah.
from an even man to an odd man front, how much of a transition is that defensively? If you've ever been involved in something like that.
Yeah, well, the first thing from a real technical aspect, there are different types of linemen you need to be really good at one of those two fronts. If you're in a four-man front, you want your two inside tackles. You kind of want two guys both athletic, if you can, that can rush the passer a little bit and play over the guard and out in the B gap, etc. And a lot of people are still recruiting old nose tackles, and they're flip flopping those two inside guys, and then they play on the outside edge with their ends, or they recruit to a 3-4 type of thing, and they have a two outside backer and three inside linemen. Two of them playing over the tackle, and one playing over the guard. Obviously, if you got a lineman that's got to be able to line up over an offensive tackle and hold up in the running game, and then you want him to at least give you a little bit of pass rush on the edge at times, you got it. Those are hard to find. They're very hard to find. And even South Carolina, we've kind of felt out. It felt like we picked our poison and said we can recruit some great edge players and we can recruit some athletic inside guys. We're never going to have the gigantic, tremendous four techniques on a consistent basis because there are not that many of them out there. And South Carolina's a hard recruiting job. I mean, you don't have a lot of tradition, and so you when you go out recruiting, you're in line behind some guys consistently have been up in national titles and so forth. But Citadel, same thing. I mean, you've got a recruiting disadvantage. You've got the military aspect, and it's a difficult academic school. It's not Harvard, but it's tough. And so, you just can't bring any kid in there. He's not going to succeed. So they're both pretty difficult recruiting jobs. And that's why I felt that if I could play anything I wanted to play, I think the 3-4 is still the most sound, most difficult defense for teams to attack if you have good players physically that fit those particular techniques that you're trying to play up front. And if you don't, it doesn't matter what you line up in. Now the whatever, the 3-3-5 or the 4-2-5, however you want to get into it, the reason so many people play in that fifth DB now, even in regular downs, is nobody plays with two tight ends or a tight end and a fullback anymore. Occasionally, you'll see them sneak two tight ends in there, and they'll put one of the tight ends in the backfield. But it's just not very often. There's three wideouts or more out there in people's base attack now, and you can't play those guys with 7 box players. You end up with guys out in space that can't get the job done. So it's that's why they ran it. They sped up the tempo. They get in 3 or more wides. They make you put extra DBs on the field. They know you're not quite as stout against the run, so they get a decent running game out of it just by they block you by alignment. They make you get outside of the box, and they run the football in there with different types of running game. So the last 20, 25 years of college football has definitely, as you know, gradually shifted to an offensive game. And the reason is it's gotten more spread out, and it's a lot more of a big play type of attack. And the rules have helped a little bit. Every now and again they'll cut out a low block, or they'll cut out this, they'll cut out that to help the defense. But most of the time, rules are formed to have a little bit more offensive action, and it's based, I guess, for the viewers, for the
fans. The other question I had for you is, and I had a lot of some Citadel fans email me, text me throughout the year. It seems like that. Kind of the decision between getting pressure on the quarterback or laying off. You know what I'm trying to say? It's like you either blitz and you're trying to get pressure on the quarterback, or you're laying off and just kind of the bend don't break mentality. And to me, it's an issue of what kind of offense are you going to face? Like, how quickly does a quarterback get the ball out of his hand? Because that has changed the last 20 years. I'm sure you know that, Coach, as well as I do, that they just get the ball out of their hands so quickly that it doesn't. You could have 20 to Davion Clowney's lining up, but if he's getting the ball out in a second or two, I don't care how fast Davion is, he's not going to get to the quarterback. So how do you pick your poison there? What's your philosophy on that?
Yeah, a great point leading into your question, such timely. I was just Clemson yesterday, just visiting my son and visiting Wesley after the practice. Wes Godwin, the coordinator, he was a grad assistant for me at Mississippi State. And he was talking about, they've been checking that statistic, how fast the ball's coming out. they've been keeping up with it the last 3 years. And he said it's gradually going down. I mean, I'd have never thought about it. But he said it averaged about 3.2 seconds 3 years ago, and it's down to 2.5 now.
Wow.
And you say, well, you're talking about less than a second. What's the big deal? It's a big deal when you're trying to get to a passer. And so I think you're right. Sometimes all this blitzing and everything, it looks good. And even if you get there, you got a 7-yard loss. And I told Wesley, I said, the more you blitz, the more you sack, the fewer picks you're going to get. So and I think, when you got good front players, turn them loose and defend the down and distance or the goal line more frequently. And then blitzing is more effective when you do it. If you have to make a living at it, people are too good. They're going to come up with a scheme for it. They're going to max protect, or they're going to spread out, get it to a player out there who's better than your player in space, and you're going to get a big play. And it doesn't matter how hard you hit the quarterback, the ball's gone. So your point is well taken, and it's sort of the way the game's going now. Is to quit trying to drop back and stand 7 yards deep in the pocket and throw a 40-yard ball. They don't do that much anymore. They do on first down occasionally, but it's a great point. You don't have to blitz to be effective against a passing team.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to ask you, and Mo has talked about this the last couple of weeks, is how do you get young defensive backs confidence, which is something that he said that he's really struggled with the last 3 or 4 games.
The best way to get a corner confidence is put a safety behind him, so when he looks back there, he knows he's got help. I know they're great players, but I think anytime you put two guys out there, 35, 40 plays, one-on-one, if that wideout's pretty good, he's going to win enough. They catch balls more than DBs do, and they're running a route. They know where they're going, and the DB doesn't. And it's a hard job. And even in the downfield calls, I know I'm partial, but I think they're too picky on DBs, and they give the benefit of the doubt all this hand checking and bumping, and they always go, not always, but they usually go with the wide receiver, and call interference on the defensive player. So I just think if you play too many snaps during the course of the game with no help from the corners, you're going to eventually give up a big play. You got to have talent. One of my other mentors, Bill Oliver, who was the coordinator at Alabama at Clemson, but I worked with him at Alabama, and he talked about his experience when he was coaching at UT Chattanooga, and I found it to be a very good analogy. He said, you could take your offensive players on that level and figure out what they can do and come up with a system, whether it's the wishbone or the four wides or whatever, and you try to hide your kids who are not as talented on that side of the ball. And, you run what you want to run to complement your talents. When you're on defense, it's hard to do that. If you got a bad player somewhere, he's going to be exposed. And you can't help all of them. You can't help put a big lineman in front of a bad linebacker or a great safety over top of a corner every play because he can't cover. So in general, I think you have to run a little bit more of two deep, and it's not as good against the run. But when you said blitz or bend and don't break, do what your players can do well, but just criticizing bend don't break, that's sometimes overused. And I think the biggest thing in football today, one of the biggest things, you've got to control explosive plays. And an explosive play in our days was a run over 10 and a pass over 15 yards. We tried not to give those up. The rest of them, coach your players not to get all bent out of shape, keep your poise. You can't start, getting out of the game plan because somebody runs the football for 6 yards on first down. You have to cut the explosive plays, and then you'll keep people off the board.
Yep.
5 decades of coaching. That's what Ellis Johnson's got in his resume, and it shows. I feel like I could be a defensive coach after hearing all this discussion.
That's 5 decades.
That's impressive. Ellis Johnson, class of 75. Again, Citadel head coach back in the 2001 through 2003 years here on Citadel Grayline. Want to let y'all know about Daybreak Adult Care Services. They're located in the Columbia area. give them a call at 803-356-4451. If you've got a person in your life that needs extra help, maybe some sitting services and more, then Daybreak Adult Care Services can help with Alzheimer's care, dementia care, respite care. Even if you've had surgery and you need a little help around the house, check out Daybreak Adult Care Services. DaybreakCare.com is the website, and the number in the Columbia area, 803-356-4451. They also have an office in Aiken, and that's 803-226-0288. No place like home, and Daybreak Adult Care Services will help you do that. Coker Day owns that company. Coker Day, class of 95, also owns Pedigo Electric Bikes, and want to remind you that they have locations in both Aiken and in West Columbia. The Soda City location, Pedigo Electric Bikes, a neat way to get around and stop by either one of those locations. Have you been on an electric bike, Ellis?
Not lately, but I might could use that day service care.
Daybreak Adult Care? Oh,
I'm
come on
not
now.
far off that.
It sounds like you're getting around. I mean, you grew up in Winnsboro. You coached in Charleston. You came back to the Columbia area. You've lived and worked in Clemson before. I mean, you should run for governor. I think we got an opening here pretty soon.
Check my social media. I'd be gone in 2 days. Yeah.
I don't know about that. But Andrew, anything else football related you need to ask the coach, or anything we need to weigh on as the Citadel gets ready for Wofford?
No, I thought again, Coach Johnson gave us a real insight into what defensive coaches think, and that's I would be, if I was a coach, I'd be more of an offensive guy, but I'm always fascinated about the guys who coach defense and stopping these offenses. And Coach Ellis is right. The game has really been kind of geared towards more offense. So it's always fascinating to me to see, get in the mindset of a defensive coach.
Yeah. Sounds to me like, I'm not saying this has happened with you, Coach Johnson, but it seems like there's some maybe at times animosity, jealousy that the defensive guys have on offense. I mean, your real big stars are usually the offensive guys, usually the quarterback.
That's right. And the quarterbacks are usually better golfers, and they always have better looking girlfriends. And so you just learn to hate them when you play the game as a player. And then, of course, you get your coach, and you just hope you got a good quarterback.
That's right.
So everything just turns. All of a sudden, you love quarterbacks. But I think in many aspects, defense is a lot harder to coach than offense. I don't know if it's harder to teach, but I think as far as trying to strategize, and I don't know. I think sometimes the defense will get ahead of the offense with some things you steal from the NFL, maybe if you're there. But for the most part, it's always offenses innovating over the years, coming up with a new thing. Defense is having to, figure out a way to stop it. And they usually do, but by that time they've moved on to another thing. I guess the greatest example are the RPOs, the run pass options.
Yeah.
A lot of fans probably watch it. They don't even know it's an option. They're faking the run and they end up throwing the pass. They think it was just a play action pass. Well, that could have been a run, depending on what the quarterback did. All that started about a little over 10 years ago, and defenses are catching up with it a little bit.
Ellis, I wanted to ask you one of the things, if people have followed you through the years, they know that you've had a battle with health. If you could, you're looking good. Tell us what's going on with you health-wise, and then you mentioned you've got the son in Clemson. Just give me a quick family update.
Yeah, I'm doing fine for the most part. I'm 71 years old, be 72 next month. I had to battle with Hodgkin's back in 1993, and fortunately I was in good health when it occurred, and I got excellent treatment at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and so it was all in remission, if you will. And one of the pluses on that is when I had the treatments, I had a heart artery damage and a thyroid, and so a lot of things that spun off of the treatments. And so I have been going to specialists annually, getting checked. And the one thing I would say is advise anybody, get physicals, get checked every year, because there's so many things they can do to help you now. And, I had an older brother who never got colonoscopies, and he had a colon operation at something like 58 years old. And you had to have an ostomy. So that's the only thing I would take from that. I mean, you can't control sometimes what happens to you in life, but it certainly made me more aware of my health, my habits, my eating habits, my exercise, and my doctors. And I've been religious about those, cardio, everything. Uh, I've got three children. Started a little late. Seemed like a great idea at the time, but I'm 71 years old. I'll be 72 next month, and at the time I turn 72, I think I'll have two in college. Right now, I've got three of them in college. So, so the senator keeps calling me, wanting to know what I'm going to do with my money, and I said it's all getting spent right now at South Carolina, Auburn, and Clemson, and I don't have any money, so don't ask for it anymore.
Yeah, I
But
remember you had young children.
yes, I've it's been tremendous. I've been a better father in some ways because I've had more time. Some of it being retirement years, and some of it just being patience. But I've really enjoyed it and had no regrets at all. But I'll be glad when they all get out of college. They're about to break the bank.
Well, that's awesome. All right, again, football wise, Citadel this week has the home finale as the Wofford Terriers come to town, and we'll be here to wrap up the football home finale and get you ready for the actual finale on the season, which is the trip to ETSU. And we sure hope Coach Johnson's longtime friend and his assistant coach at times, Maurice Drayton, gets a couple of victories before it's all said and done, because it's been a tough first year as Drayton has been leading the Bulldogs in his debut as a head football coach in the SoCon and at South Carolina's Military College. Okay, Ellis, how did you do in basketball growing up?
I loved it. It was kind of my favorite sport to play, but I obviously wasn't that good. But I had a really unusual situation at the Citadel. Back then, football and basketball had to have freshman teams, so you didn't play varsity as a freshman. And I remember we were finishing up our freshman season, and Coach Robinson, Les Robinson, was the freshman basketball coach back then. And he came over to the locker room and told any of us that had played basketball he needed some help. I think he'd lost a few kids in the cadre. And then, obviously you can't sign a whole lot. So you had to have a basketball team. And about seven of us went over there, and he kept three of us on the team. And I thought I'd done a pretty good job, but I found out later, I kind of figured it out later. Chuck Cordell was one of my buddies at my L company. We practically roomed together. We had two seniors. We were the knobs, two seniors. And I think Chuck told him to keep me. So anyhow, I was kind of a practice guy, but I had a ball. It's one of the most fun things I've ever done in sports. And of course, I developed a relationship with Coach Robinson, and he is who hired me to be the head coach at the Citadel many, many years later when he came back as AD.
I didn't even know you were on the
So,
Citadel basketball team. I'm sorry.
oh yeah, John, you gotta, check the record books, man.
I should have been learning that during my days studying the guidon. Your picture should have been on the cover when I was
Trust me,
an
you're not the only guy who didn't know.
Okay. All right. Well, you need to promote that. Legendary Citadel basketball player Ellis Johnson here with us today. Well, there's a fellow Citadel grad, Ellis, of yours that is coaching the Citadel basketball team today, and that's Ed Conroy. And the Bulldog basketball team went up to Raleigh and played NC State this week. They lost, but a close game, rather, I would say, respectively. Andrew, your thoughts on how this Bulldog basketball team looked in that first game?
Well, I think, they go up there to Raleigh, they lose 72-59, 13 points. They out-rebound North Carolina State, which is obviously an ACC team. That's a huge positive there. I thought some of the younger guys played well. A.J. Smith led them with 15 points. The two graduate transfers, Winston Hill and Quentin Brown, they both played really well and played matched up pretty well with the NC State interior guys. So I think that was a positive. Although I will say one side note here, I did a story on Winston Hill for the college basketball preview, and then I did a story on C.J. Fulton over at the College of Charleston. And at one point Monday night, I was looking at the statistics. They were both combined 0 for 14 from the field and had combined 6 turnovers. And Ed Conroy texted me after the game and said, the Post and Courier Andrew Miller jinx is still in high order here because they were both did not play very well. Although Winston had a much better second half than he did the first half, but thought showed a very respectable outing against them, and we'll play Friday night in the home opener at Johnson Hagan. Jeez, at McAllister Fieldhouse against Boston College, who was coached by Earl Grant, who was a former assistant coach at the Citadel, and then the head coach at the College of Charleston. He's bringing in the Eagles in here, which I think is a great because not many ACC teams will come to mid-major schools like the Citadel or like the College of Charleston. So, and that's Earl. That's just who he is. Kid that graduated from Stall High School. A guy that Ed Conroy recruited when he was the head coach of Francis Marion, tried to get him to go from Stall to Francis Marion, ended up going to Boston at Georgia College, who they ended up playing against Francis Marion in that Division II league that they were in. So I expect them to play pretty well. Like I said, I'm picking them to be about 500 this year, give or take 2 or 3 games.
All right. That sounds awesome. Coach Ellis, you got plans Friday night?
I'm hoping to be in Charleston, but I want to be in Clemson. My son's going to dress out. He won't get to play much, if any. But this is the last home game, and I'd like to be down there and get to see Mo and them, and hope to get to see them after a big win.
Well, I heard you say you were going to try to go to the game this weekend. So if you happen to get to Charleston Friday, come to McAllister, place you used to play in, and check out the Citadel and Boston College hoops back on the Citadel campus. In that same arena, Ellis, you might have heard about the Citadel volleyball team this year. Have you heard about them?
I have, and I saw where they lost their only game just a week or so ago, and I saw the comments from the coach at one time. It's kind of like, you don't want to have that first loss, but he said at some point in time, I think it could do us some good, and that's the true feeling when you're coaching. Till you lose that game, see what it feels like. It kind of regenerates. So it won't be surprising to me if they can run the table the rest of the way out now.
And I do believe we should give them proper credit. Andrew, don't we have the Southern Conference champion volleyball team at the Citadel now?
I think they need one. They can do no worse than tie the season championship now. A win or a win by the Citadel or a loss by Mercer, and then they are the outright regular season champs, which is great. I was going to say one more thing to Ellis. As a dad of 2 girls, 127 and 125, they don't get any cheaper as they get older.
That's what I'm afraid of.
I just dropped $25,000 on a wedding last year, so yeah,
that's all.
It doesn't get a whole lot cheaper.
That's all.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, man. Well, I'll tell you what, Ellis, it's been great having you on. Let's give you the floor. Anything you want to say, add, comment on, questions you might have as we get ready to sign off?
Okay, wish Ed luck. First time I actually met Ed, he was at Tulane and I was at Southern Miss, and we were at spring meetings together at conference. The conference meetings. But I've always followed them and everything. And we were watching spring practice back in the spring. I think it's a kid he brought from Vanderbilt, big kid that we got to meet that day. He was visiting. But anyhow, I saw where I think he's got almost all true freshmen and then transfers. And that's a difficult merger. But I think I hope Andrew's got them pegged right. I hope they'll have a good season and get in the tournament and do some damage.
Right. And I know you like coming back to the Citadel and seeing your old buddies from the 1970s too.
Yeah, we actually, I came in 70, class of 74, John, and then I finished in 75 because of the red shirt. But next year is my 50th, so it'll be a big fun thing. Shout out to one of my classmates, Tommy McQueenie. He's like a self-appointed class secretary and just keeps the class informed of everything and personal things, people. And so we've got a really close group, class of 74, and I think it's larger because of Tommy McQueenie. But I'm looking forward to that 50th and coming down next year.
Well, congratulations on that feat. And I've had a chance to, Mr. McQueenie was very gracious to us a few years ago and let us broadcast this show from his office there in Mount Pleasant, and that was something he didn't have to do. So we appreciate him. And then, of course, your short-wearing guy from the 1970s, Mr. Nuttall.
Yes.
If you don't know who I'm talking about, just look for a guy even in the middle of winter wearing shorts. And
That's
you're being
he's
a spokesperson.
yeah, he was actually class 75, but we ended up being extremely close. He was our trainer, and when I played football, and just over the years we kept in touch, and that's where I tailgate.
Yeah, I know.
There's a lot of great tailgates down there, but I always feel like if I have any problems, I've got some guys who can take care of me there.
Yeah, they'll take care of you at the Citadel. Andrew, anything from you before we get ready to sign off for the week?
I was gonna say I used to play basketball at Days Hall with Tommy and McQueenie at lunchtime. That lunchtime group that used to come in, he used to play out there with us, and yeah, and I remember his son Billy McQueenie was at Bishop, pretty good player, Bishop England in his day.
Man,
Yep.
Yep.
small world.
Yep.
Well, Ellis, thank you for taking time to come on our show about the Citadel and your second appearance. Maybe we shouldn't wait 15 years to get you back on Citadel Gray Line.
That sounds great, John. Enjoyed it.
Oh, well, thank you. And Andrew, thank you to you. Again, it's the Citadel and the Wofford Terriers, the home finale. And let's see if Coach Drayton, a Ellis Johnson disciple, can get that first victory of the season at South Carolina's Military College. Until we are back on next week, thank you so much for tuning in Citadel Gray Line on Facebook. And then those of you who catch us in iTunes, thank you for that. Y'all have a great rest of your week and fall out.